Hi, my name's Marc Sherman. I was born April 16th, 1947. My parents are Arthur and Marva Sherman, both deceased now. My father was in the grocery business the entire time that I was growing up. We grew up on North 58th Street, down the street from all kinds of Jewish families. Went to grade school at Harrison Grade School. From Harrison, I went to Lewis and Clark Junior High School, then 4 years at Central High School, which was predominantly all Jewish students. My mother even went to Central High School, which was, long before I went there. From Central, I went to Nebraska and graduated in 1970, and spent 6 years in the Army Reserve, then went to work in the grocery business that my father owned, which was Food City at that particular time. He had a smaller store in South Omaha. It was called Joe Art Food Mart. The Joe was my father's brother-in-law, which was Joe Lipton, and my father's name was Art, and they were the first of the small supermarkets in South Omaha. And at that time, South Omaha was not what it is today. It was a very growing, hard-working neighborhood where all of the people from overseas first settled: Lithuania, Poland. They all worked in union in the packing houses. And the biggest majority of those people didn't even have checking accounts. They would come into the grocery store, and my father always on payday Friday had to have extra large amounts of money to cash their paychecks. And what they did with their money, probably took it home and stuck it under their mattress. That was the way the world operated then. Nobody had to worry about being robbed in the streets as it is in 2010. The world is different today.
Tell me, what was your mother's maiden name?
My mother's maiden name was Cohn, C-O-H-N, and her father owned a paper company. He started out when he came over from, I believe, Russia, peddling paper on the street, and he finally opened up a paper company in downtown Omaha called Omaha Paper and Notion. And when he retired, his only son, named Theo, called him Ted, took over the paper company and ran it for a number of years.
And your father's side of the family, did you know them?
My father's side of the family, his mother was named Minnie, and his father was also Joseph, Joseph Sherman. Yes, Joseph Cohn was my mother's side. And I knew my grandmother. My grandmother died when I was probably 10 years old. My grandfather, whose name was Joseph, died, I was less than a year old, or let's say I was more than that. I was probably about 4 years old when he died, and I remember him only as a man laying on a couch in Grandma and Grandpa's house, and he'd always want me, whenever I go over there, to come over and talk to him as he was laying there, and just listen to him. I think he was enamored to see one of his grandchildren that would talk to him, but I've just limited memories of him.
How about growing up at home? Did you have much connection with grandparents?
When I was real little, my grandparents on my mother's side, which was Eva and Joe Cohn, lived in Omaha, and they would stay with us when Mom and Dad would go on a vacation. But they moved to, I believe, California. I must have been probably 7 or 8 years old. And we didn't see much of them after that, only when we would take a family vacation. We always went to their house in the summertime every other year. I don't remember ever flying with my parents. I remember going once on the Union Pacific Express train across the country with myself and my mom and dad and my sister, visiting my grandparents. But every couple of years we would drive all the way across the country in an unair-conditioned car to California and stay in the house with Grandma and Grandpa. Then Grandpa died, and then we still would continue to go and stay and see Grandma and one of her daughters, named Dolores, lived in the apartment above her house and literally took care of her until she passed away. She fell, I imagine she was in her mid to late 80s, and broke a hip and didn't live too much longer after that.
How about the Sherman grandparents?
Like I say, that I don't remember my grandfather very much. My grandmother, I remember her. She would always come to our house on holidays, eat with us, and every Sunday we would go over and visit her. I remember she was always really old. Even when I was little, she seemed extremely old to me. Always very nice. It was fun to go to her house. She lived on 42nd and Woolworth, on the corner right across from the VA hospital, and she always had a boarder that lived in the basement. The basement was a separate apartment, and it was usually a medical student or a nursing student or a nurse, an intern that lived there, and it was just fun to go to their house. It was a two-story house, and we'd like to go up in the attic and play in the attic. But then she died, like I say, I must have been 13, 15 years old when she died, and then we were very close to her sister, which was my great aunt, my father's aunt. Her name was Bertha Frank. She was married to Abe Frank, and he was from the East Coast, and they owned a jewelry store on South 24th Street called King's Jewelry. And they became our surrogate grandparents. We'd go over to their house. We had no grandparents here. My sister and myself, my older brother was already moved out of the house, but he's quite a bit older than me. My sister and myself and my parents would always go over to Bertha and King's house, and we didn't call them Aunt Bertha. They were just Bertha and King, and they were very close to us. I remember every holiday, they never had children. Every holiday was at their house. They had a fireplace that we used to love to go over and sit at, and it was before the fireplaces were really popular. And we enjoyed them, holidays, any type of an event that we could get together, we'd end up at their house. And for our birthdays, the thing that really sticks in my mind, Uncle King was a big, tall man. He was probably 6'3", and he had played football in his younger days for the university he went to. And I remember seeing pictures of him on the wall. I believe it was Princeton University. It was one of the Ivy League schools, wearing a leather helmet. It was the most unusual looking thing you ever saw, but he was very kind to us, and she was extremely generous. That they had a money bag, an old canvas money bag. It was filled with quarters on up, $50 and silver dollars. No paper, no folding money. And for our birthdays, every time we went there, we got to take our little hands and put it in this money bag, and whatever we could bring out in coins, we kept. And I know that I always got more than my sister because I had bigger hands. I was 5 years older than my sister, and I used to give her a hard time about that. But that was both of us would go on each other's birthday, and we'd stick our hand in this money bag and come away with, probably $7.25, and thought we were big time.
What are your memories of your dad?
My dad. I remember my dad. My dad worked a lot. He was at the grocery store on South Omaha, and my dad liked the horses. Exarban was a major track at that time. I'm going back in the mid-50s, early 60s, and he would go to the track every night after work. When they had twilight races, he'd leave work at 5 o'clock, and he wouldn't come home till 7. And about once every 3 weeks, my mom would get mad at him and says, "Arthur, you've been to the track enough. Stay home." But I don't know, she sort of gave up that. She realized that he was going to do that. And any time that he had a good day, that he won, he would come home and he said, "I hit it big today." And he would share his wealth with everybody. He'd walk around the house. It was myself and my sister and my mom and we'd all get something, whether it was a $10 bill, a $50 bill, a $20 bill. He'd give us something and give us the events of the day, that he had 3 winners, and he was so proud of himself that he was able to pick it. But he just really thoroughly enjoyed going there and reading the racing form and trying to figure out what these horses were going to do. And he always thought that he knew more than the other guy. Didn't really. And occasionally when I got to be the point that I was old enough to go into the track, he'd try to show me what he was doing, and I had no interest in trying to learn how to read that racing form. It was just a bunch of gobbledygook numbers to me. But I liked to watch him and a pair of binoculars, and he sat with a whole bunch of his friends, and a lot of them were Jewish. There's a whole group of Jewish people that used to go to that track, and some of them were really bookmakers. I don't really think he ever did that, but I know he bet the horses all the time. And then on football season, when the horses weren't running, he liked to pick the winners of the football games, and he would bet parlays. And the same thing, he would tell to me. I was probably the only one he told at the house, because Mom wasn't interested and my sister didn't know what was going on with football. He said, I have a 5-team parlay, and I need one more team to win. If I get this other team to win, I'm going to win $372 or something. And I would sit and I'd try to help him root for this team. Very rarely did the other team win, because you just can't win those. But every once in a while, he'd hit something big, and he'd walk around the house, and there's $20 for you, here's $50 for Mom. And whenever he did that, something like that, he would go to, he liked to buy my mom jewelry at Borsheim's. And I don't know if the jewelry was really that expensive, but as all the other Jewish people in town, they knew Ike Friedman, and he'd go in and see Ike and say, I want a particular type of pearl or ring for my mom. And she kept all that stuff, and all of those memories went to my sister. When my mom died, she gave her all of her jewelry, whether it was real or fake or whatever it was. It was something that my sister got.
How about your sister? You mentioned a brother and a sister. What can you tell me about your
Yeah, I
sister?
have an older brother. He's 7 years older than me. And being 7 years older, when I was just going into high school, he was already out of high school in his second or third year of college and ready to graduate. And we weren't real close growing up. We shared a room together in the house for all those years. But he was so much, none of his friends associated with me, and I didn't associate with him. I was so much younger. 7 years when you're growing up's a lot. I'm much closer now with my brother. He went to Creighton University, pharmacy school, became a pharmacist, and he had a pharmacy in Omaha for a number of years and worked hard at the pharmacy. He made a good living at the pharmacy. And then a long time ago, I'd say over 20 years ago, it has to be 25 years ago, he moved to Arizona. When he first got out of pharmacy school, he got married and moved to Arizona for a short period of time and became licensed in Arizona, and always kept that license up and figured that someday he would want to go back there. And he did, and he had his license to practice pharmacy in Arizona as well as Nebraska, and got a job instantly. And he's still there. Now he's retired, and he still hasn't totally retired. The place that he worked for the last 12 years continues to call him back and say, we have somebody going on vacation, can you help us out? And so he continues to work every other weekend or maybe one day during the week, or help whenever somebody's sick. But the pharmacists are in demand in Arizona, probably more so than they are in the other parts of the country because of all the old people there, and there's a limited number of schools for pharmacists. My sister is 5 years younger than me, and we grew up together, so we were quite close. We would pick on each other like siblings do, and I usually got the bad end of it because she was the only girl in the family. She also now lives in Arizona. She moved to Kansas City, and she's been married twice. Had a couple bad experiences, but now she's married to a real nice fella. He's an eye doctor, and they have a nice life living together in a rural area of Scottsdale called Cave Creek, and it's not my choice of where I'd like to live because it's all all gravel roads and dirt roads, and you got 5 minutes of driving on roads that I think that some went out of existence in 1950. But they enjoy it. They both have SUV vehicles that they can get in and out of there, and big sprawling house, and they enjoy Arizona. And I see my brother, who lives about 40 miles away in another part of Phoenix. Not a lot, but I think they get together once a month or so and go for breakfast or dinner.
What's your brother's name?
My brother's name is Jerry. My sister's name is Joanne. So,
Let's go back. I want to hear about your mother now.
my mother, Marva, she had an unusual middle name. Her name was Arbor, so Marva Arbor Cohn. She grew up in Omaha, and basically Mom raised us because Mom was home all the time, and she was the one that took us to school, picked us up, took us to Cub Scout meetings or whatever it happened to be. And the only time that Dad got involved with that was when we misbehaved, and she would say, "You just wait till your father comes home." And we were kind of scared if Dad had to get involved, and we usually made up with Mom and did what she wanted before Dad got home so we didn't get into trouble. But Mom and Dad moved to Arizona, not Phoenix or Scottsdale. They moved to Tucson 30 years ago. And my dad always really wanted to live in a warm climate, and he said that after he retired, he felt like he was on vacation all the time, living in that type of a climate. He didn't have anything to do. He did some volunteering at a hospital, and he volunteered for the Pima County attorney as an undercover investigator, walking into grocery stores and seeing if they were labeling their meat properly, because he had a long experience with the meat, and I think they appreciated his help, and he could talk the grocer's language and relate that back to the county attorney or the sheriffs if they thought there were some complaints about something that was really not ground beef or ground sirloin, it was really ground buffalo or whatever it was, but he knew. And they enjoyed that, and they lived their life, the rest of their lives, both in Tucson. And he died, and Mom lived about 10 years after he did. Very nicely, he left her with enough money to live that she didn't have to worry how she was going to get along. But they were very close their whole life. They liked to travel. She, towards the end, she didn't like to travel as much as he did, so they stayed close to home. She was afraid that he was going to get sick or something. But she lived, like I say, about 10 years after he did, and she lived until she was 5 weeks short of the 90th birthday. She got leukemia, probably due to something that she had encountered 30 years before in her life. She had a radium implant for some cancer, and they say that after a long period of time, after you've had that, it affects your blood, and she got leukemia, and she was sick for only 6 months. She chose not to have any treatment because the doctor didn't think that the treatment would work with somebody her age, and it would be 6 months of living agony. So she chose just to live normally and let the disease run its course. And the doctor told her she'd live for 6 months after she got it, and it was almost exactly 6 months. She finally got sick 1 week before she died, and she had 1 week of uncomfortable living. She was in hospice at the house, and she died in her bed. And my sister was with her when she died, and that was really sad because we were all really close to Mom. She was sort of the mainstay of the family.
Did your mother have siblings?
Mom did have siblings. She was one of, let me think, there was Theo, his name was Ted, and then there was Dolores and Neoma. So she was one of 4. Neoma moved to California. Dolores moved to California. and Ted moved to Arizona. Actually, he had moved to Phoenix prior to my parents. No, I think he moved to Tucson. That's right. He moved to Tucson prior to my parents retiring there, and my parents were close with him. They lived about 9-10 blocks away from him in the same neighborhood when they moved there, and then he sold that house, and he did finally end up in Phoenix, where some of his children lived.
And how about on your father's side?
My father had one brother and one sister. The sister's name was Pearl, and she was married to Joe, and that was my dad was in business with Joe in the grocery store. And another brother name was Gary. I guess he went by Gershwin, but Gary was a short for that. And he was in the grocery business also. And when my father first got out of school, I don't think my father went to college more than 1 year. He went into business with his brother. They had a whole bunch of supermarkets during the Great Depression in the 30s. The supermarkets were all in small towns around Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, and Nebraska. And they had a couple trucks. I know that they would go between their stores, funny-looking old trucks that you drove back then. And they had some financial problems, and my father blamed my brother for all the financial problems because it was his business. My father was just, working with him. And but the business licenses some of them were in my father's name, and Prohibition was going on at that time. And I never knew what caused it, but the business failed, and part of it was due to some things that were being done illegally. Maybe it was cigarettes or liquor going across state lines with tax not being paid on it, and the federal marshals seized some of the assets and charged the business with a crime. And my father was the one that took the brunt of it because the business license was in his name. And I think that Gary had been in some previous illicit activities and whatever it was that couldn't hold the licenses that the state and the federal government required. So that's how it got in my father's name. But my father was convicted of whatever it was. It was a federal crime. Never spent time in jail or anything like that. But all the time that they were in business together, or after they left business together, basically, he blamed his brother for all the happenings that happened to him, and he wasn't able to vote or own a firearm because the crime that he was convicted of was a federal felony of something. And he got a presidential pardon in the late 1950s when Eisenhower was president, and he was quite relieved at that time to have his good name brought back, and he was able to put licenses and get credit and vote. For the longest time, he wasn't able to vote in the federal election because of what was on his record, and because of all these things that went on earlier, he was upset with his brother and mad at him. I never knew my uncle. Never even saw him all the entire life that we lived in Omaha. If we would go to my grandmother's house and my uncle happened to be there, we would just keep on going and wouldn't turn in the driveway. And I got to know my uncle 2 weeks before he died. My father made up with him when he was in the hospital on his deathbed and took me up there to introduce me to him. And he had a really strange resemblance to my father. I mean, he was like 10 years older than my father, but it was almost eerie to see how much they resembled each other. And he passed away, and I think he had some sort of cancer that he passed away from. And my father was one of the pallbearers, and he put him to rest. That they had made up, I guess. But all the time that I was growing up, didn't know my uncle, and he had 2 children, and I have 2 first cousins that I barely know because we just didn't get along. And I think oh, I don't know if I would say somewhat common, but kind of that kind of stuff goes on in Jewish families, or it did back then.
Let's go back and talk about your going to the university. What did you study there?
I took business classes at the university, and I have a degree in business administration from the University of Nebraska. The last year that I went to school, I went to the University of Nebraska at Omaha. So my degree says University of Nebraska at Omaha. The university was previously Omaha University, but it changed to become an institution of the state. And I lived at home most of those years. And, I don't know if some people really go out and really enjoy their college years. It was just, 4 more years of education. I think I worked for my father 4 of those years in the grocery store doing one thing or another, whether it was peeling onions or cutting lettuce or putting potatoes in bags or sacking groceries. It gave me some money to buy whatever I wanted to buy. It probably gave me, instead of a quarter an hour, I might have got 30 cents an hour. But I put it all together, and when I was able to get my senior year of high school, when I had enough money to buy a car so I could take the car to college.
You mentioned just earlier about working in the grocery store. Did you spend a lot of time in the grocery store?
I did.
Over the years?
Over the years, yeah, I did. And when I did get out of college, I went to work for him. By at that time, 1965, they opened up the first really large supermarket in Omaha called Food City. My father and my uncle and 2 of their friends, the friends' name were Ruback, Howard and Norman Ruback. The 4 of them got together and pooled their resources and opened up a store on 120th and Center Street. By today's standards, it was not a large supermarket, but at that time it was the only major league supermarket in the city. And when I got out of school in '71, I went to work there. I was running the wine and liquor department, and they opened up another store about must have been '75 on 90th and right off of Blondo, another second store. And about 5 years later, they opened up a third store. They didn't call that Food City, they called that World of Food. It was on 78th and Dodge, and it eventually became a Bag and Save, and then they moved out, and it's an empty building now, but it was the first box store in town. And they were, if they would have really stayed with it, they probably could have been what Baker's became in Omaha, as the premier grocery store. But the Rubacks didn't want to expand anything. They were very conservative people. At least that's what I was told, why they didn't expand. But they had 3 stores, and I worked in all 3 of them, one way or another. Most of the time I was doing the wine and liquor. We had a truck that went between the different stores, and I would make sure the truck was on its schedule, delivering its products, picking up in the warehouse. And that's, it was the start of my working career.
Where did you go from there?
My father sold his interest back to his partners and retired to Arizona. And I stayed on at working at Food City for a number of years after that, like 5 years after that, doing what he did and running the liquor departments, and was paid very well for it. And the Rubacks at that particular time decided they were going to sell the business, and they sold the business to an outside person. And he came in, and I could see the very first day that he came in, he didn't have what it took to run that store. And I knew that just wasn't going to make it. So I started looking for something else. And I went to work as the wine sales manager for Sterling Distributing Company. I went to work for a Jewish fella named Mort Fisher. He was real good to me. I had a good job for about 6 years there. And my gut feeling that the Food City stores weren't going to make it, when this new fella came in, was exactly right. The new fella came in, and he immediately threw out the meat cutters union, told them they had no place in his new business. Was just rude to every vendor that that they had made 20 years worth of friendships were started all from new, and it was his own way, and it took him all of 18 months to bankrupt the business. He literally bankrupted. He took Pepsi-Cola and Wonder Bread and all the local vendors for thousands upon thousands of dollars that he owed him, and he couldn't pay him. He declared bankruptcy, and they went their own way. And I think the only one that came out of the whole thing were the Ruback family, because they got their money from the bank that financed it and the grocery company that financed it. So they were well healed from what they got out of it, and left all the employees hanging there. And the business was sold to a company called Nash Finch, who tried to take it over. And at that time, Baker's was expanding, Albertsons was in the market, and there was just no space for another small grocery chain that wasn't locally managed from Minneapolis. Nobody cared, so they didn't last very long. They just finally eventually closed up all the stores. And I worked at Sterling Distributing for 5 years, and then I felt like I wanted to get back in the retail business, and I went into a business called Spirit World with a partner, Denny Lewis. He owned one Spirit World, and he wanted to open another one, and I had some money set aside that I used and bought into his business, and I owned that for 13 years, and we had a separation of our ideas, and we closed that store, and then I ended up working as a store manager for a company called Cost Plus World Market for 6 years. As a store manager, it was a large store. It was probably the best job I ever had. It was a huge company, had 300 stores, and 3 of the stores were in Omaha, and they did very well. The store that I ran was the largest store, did about $5 million a year in volume, and probably would have been okay, but the company overexpanded and opened a 3rd store in Omaha, and the 3rd store was not viable. It was down in Shadow Lake, Papillion area, and it wasn't cutting it, and because it wasn't cutting it, the company had financial problems in 2008 and closed 26 stores at one time, and the 3 stores in Omaha were victims of the 26 stores being closed. So I lost my job, was laid off, and temporarily retired, and decided I might work part-time again. That's what I'm doing now.
How did you meet your wife?
How did I meet my wife? Wow, you're really going back a long way. My wife, Claudia, went to the University of Missouri, and her parents were from Omaha, and her father was in the Air Force, and they traveled and lived all over the world. She lived in Okinawa, she lived in Germany, she lived in France, but her grandparents continued to live in Omaha. It was Reuben and Tibby Harris, so she would come back during the holidays, and she came back one holiday when I was a junior in college, and so was she. She was going to Columbia, Missouri, University of Missouri, and we had a mutual friend that introduced us, and we started dating, and she would come back, and one thing led to another, and we got married in 1971.
How about your children?
Mitch and Jill. Mitch is a reporter for the Omaha World Herald. He's worked there for 10, 12 years now. He graduated from Nebraska and got a job right out of college working for them because he had been an intern. And my daughter Jill doesn't have a full-time job at this time, but she lives at home with us. And my son Mitch and his wife Shannon have one little granddaughter. So we are grandparents, and my wife just truly enjoys having the grandchild come over and spend time with her, and that's her newfound passion, is taking care of the granddaughter. Well, we've talked a long time about my family and my parents' family, my wife's family, and all the kids, and just let everybody know that all the time that my wife and the kids and all of our families, how much they meant to me and how much I love them all.